So I am actually quite thrilled to be interviewing Mr. Kabir Bedi. I have heard of him as a star and even as a friend's father's friend when we were in school and telling us what a dude he was. So it's a pleasure to be talking to him now after having heard about him everywhere. I have just read his just released autobiography. It is called Stories I Must Tell: The Emotional Life of an Actor. In your book, Mr. Bedi, you have had a string of very high profile romances, uh, like People Would Want to Be You, and emotional ups and downs. And I wonder that, considering your formative years were so spiritual, surrounded by such spirituality, how is it that your emotional state was always looking for the pursuit of a companion, whereas you spent so much time in Vipassana even as a young teen? You became that outcome of a monk. So just resolve that for me. Why is it that it wasn't spirituality that you clung to, rather, like you have said in this, it was, whenever you were emotionally distraught, you looked for a soulmate?
There was that spiritual underlay to my formative years, and what they gave me was the confidence to live life differently, to do things that my parents had not done before, to seek out the road less traveled. And that's what took me from Delhi to Mumbai, to a career in advertising and theater. And my need for companionship is coupled with a need for love, and also the fact that I do believe in marriage. Perhaps that is why I have got married so many times. Otherwise, if I just wanted to be footloose and fancy free and, do whatever single people do with the freedom that single people have, why would I have got married so many times?
So you worked in, Hollywood, you worked in Europe, across Europe in soap operas. Give me an idea of the contrasts in working in Europe and Hollywood and India, both the financial aspect, like a small part in a mid-level film in Hollywood is way more economically rewarding than a leading part in India, the work culture, and otherwise the audience culture, the professional culture, because you've experienced it all. I'd really like to get an insight, and please take your time in answering each of these aspects of how you experienced it.
That could be a book in itself, because it's not a simple answer. So there is a huge difference in the work culture and ethic of Hollywood and Bollywood. More contrast in those days than today. Europe falls somewhere in between. They like to plan sort of like Hollywood, but then they sort of improvise like Bollywood. And they sort of get the best of both worlds. In terms of economics, again, it's a bit of apples and oranges, because in every film's culture, the big stars get the disproportionate amount of the income. The supporting actors get much less, and the lowest rung of actors get even less. You can't compare what you make there with here, because again, costs of living are higher there. So even if you make more there, you end up spending more there. But I would say that the biggest change that's happened, both in Hollywood and Bollywood, is...
Your book says nothing unkind about anyone. I find that unusual and unbelievable. Are you being too kind? Are you channeling your inner Buddhist and forgiving everybody? Because one could not have had a journey like yours without coming across some real horrible, prickish people.
I mean, I've had one hell of a life, and it's traversed 3 continents and seen incredible successful stardom in Europe, loved and lost some amazing women, suffered the pain of my son's suicide, resurrected myself from the ashes of bankruptcy, all kinds of things I have done in my life. So when I was setting out to write this story, I chose the form of telling it through a series of short stories. And in doing so, I was able to write of each story independently, from beginning to end. So the stories overlapped in time, so I could go back and forth. And the reason I did that was because it was more interesting for me to tell the story and for people to read the story as separate stories. As a result of that form...
Mufat khoro, muft mein itna hi milega. To watch the full unedited interview, you have to subscribe to News Laundry and pay to keep news free. Because when the public pays, the public is served. We depend on you and not on advertisers. So go to www.newslaundry.com/subscription and subscribe and get all our unedited interviews, our special video shows, comics, and everything that's behind the paywall. Remember, to subscribe to News Laundry, you pay just about 10 rupees a day. That's less than, well, no, a cigarette. And smoking is injurious to health. So subscribe and watch the full interview.
When did you realize that your normal wasn't normal at all?
That's a very good question, Babette.
How did it feel to meet the Beatles? Any story that didn't make it to the book and you can share with us?
Because of the Beatles interview, caused me to think about life more deeply, look at the options that I had, and set out to find a whole new career, a whole new life. Yes, it was the most difficult chapter for me to write because it was brought back all the emotions that I went through. I had a slim langot that covered my front, which was not seen by the audience, but I looked naked and the audience gasped, you know. Many cynics said that it was the sight of my butt that made the play a success, but the fact of the matter is it was a great play written by Girish Karnad.
I mean, you could have been a legend and you've settled for a little less than that. So where do you think you kind of missed?
I certainly don't count among the major actors of Bollywood, but there are good reasons for that. I became a writer not because of all the great writing that I read, but because of all the mediocre writing that I saw published. And I said to myself, I can write better than these buggers. I have many more stories to tell. And I will tell those stories if enough people are interested in these stories that I have to tell, because this is the crux of my life.